our days are a collection of moments. And if I can get to the end of the day and there are people in my life who I love and they love me back, then how can I call the full day a bad one? It seems too binary, too absolute. So I look at my days now as if there can be good moments, quote unquote, and there can also be bad moments. But the full day, I haven't had a bad one since. I celebrate that as a way to sort of celebrate all that life brings us. And by living life that way, I've found a little bit greater peace, a little bit more grace as we try to navigate all the uncertainty that life presents in current day for us.
Welcome back to the 10 Adventures podcast. Today, we're going to talk about how a near-death experience led to a radical life change. And this eventually led to cycling across the U.S. Here to share his story is Michael O'Brien, founder of Pause, Breathe, Reflect, where he helps individuals and organizations expand their awareness, sharpen their focus, and approach life with equanimity. Hi, Michael. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Richard. Thanks for having me. This is going to be so much fun to talk about a variety of different things. And it's really cool that you're in Switzerland right now as we chat. And I'm back here in New Jersey. So you have a better view, I think, of things.
I'm sure New Jersey is beautiful this time of year.
It is beautiful, albeit a little humid, but it is summertime. It just goes with the territory. We take it because in about 6 months, it'll be cold and everyone will be complaining about how cold it is. So we try to embrace all types of weather.
That's the way to think about it. I want to start by talking a little about this incredible story about how your life changed and what you've called your last bad day. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. So actually today, as we sit down to record this, it's the anniversary of my accident. So 24 years ago, I was out in New Mexico for a company offsite meeting. I brought my bike out to do a little cycling in New Mexico. I have this big goal of riding my bike in all 50 states, and New Mexico had not been conquered yet. So I brought my bike out, and one morning I was doing a little loop on the hotel property. It was a 2-mile loop. I was going to do it about 10 times, get a 20-mile bike ride in, and feel all good as I headed into the offsite meeting and the PowerPoint and team building exercises. And that morning, unfortunately, a Ford Explorer, I was going about 40 miles an hour, crossed over the center line of the road and hit me head on. I broke a whole bunch, like a laundry list of broken bones and scrapes and bruises and cuts. And the big thing that made it a life and death situation is that the left femur shattered. And then when it shattered, it lacerated the femoral artery of my left leg. So I was losing a lot of blood. And they flew me to Albuquerque, which was about 20 minutes away. The first surgery was 13 hours. And the trauma team later told me, also told my wife, we have no idea how you survived. So I feel very fortunate just to be here. And then the next few days I was in the ICU. And then I had, over the course of these many years, so many different surgeries, countless hours of rehab. But I found a way to take little micro steps, a little micro progress, if you will. And I call the day my last bad day because one of my mentors shared with me in the earlier parts of my recovery, when I was feeling all woe for me and feeling like a victim, he said, listen, everything in life is neutral until you place a label on it. You get to label this any way you want to. So you can see yourself as a victim and no one's going to argue with you because look at you, Michael, you're a mess. I mean, he said it in a sort of a nice way. And he said, but you can reframe this into something else. And I thought about that for a while. At first, I thought it was like a Jedi mindset trick he was playing on me. It was a question that came too soon. But I realized that in life, our days are a collection of moments. And if I can get to the end of the day and there are people in my life who I love and I have, they love me back, then how can I call the full day a bad one? It seems too binary, too absolute. So I look at my days now as some moments of joy, and then in the same day, I can have moments of sadness. There can be good moments, quote unquote, and there can also be bad moments. But the full day, I haven't had a bad one since. So I celebrate that as a way to sort of celebrate all that life brings us. And by living life that way, I've found a little bit greater peace, a little bit more grace as we try to navigate all the uncertainty that life presents in current day for us.
That's such a great way to approach life. I wonder if you can talk a little bit more where you were at mentally, maybe in the days right after the accident or, going through all these surgeries. How dark did it get? Then how did it just one day all of a sudden things change for you? Or was it a series of just baby steps that eventually you got to this point where you are right now?
A little bit of both, to be honest. So the it was pretty dark though, right after. I remember when they put me on the helicopter because I was still conscious at that point in time when they flew me to Albuquerque. I made a bargain with anyone who is listening, Richard. I was like, if I live, I promise I'll do this better. Right. I was sort of in the mode of chasing my happiness, which is, I think, really commonplace even today. Thanks to social media, like we're always thinking that our happiness is going to be in the next big thing. We accomplish the next big thing at work or the next big peak, or we win a race or what have you, and then we'll get there and we'll be happy. And and sometimes you get happy for a moment and then you go back to chasing. And that was a little bit of my life back then. And I made a deal. I was like, hey, I promise I won't do that anymore if I live. And when I came out of the ICU and I really learned about the extent of my injuries, and the doctors painted a pretty grim picture. They're like, listen, you're probably going to walk with difficulty for the rest of your life. You're probably not going to get back on your bike ever again. So I always had this part of my identity as an athlete. And then I started like, can I be an athlete anymore? Like, what kind of father will I be? A husband? Will I still be able to do my job? So like my identity got flipped upside down and I got really dark pretty quickly. And it was really bad at night. So when visiting hours at the hospital were over, it was just me and all my machines beeping at me. That's when I got really depressed, worried, anxious, even vengeful. I was like, man, that driver should not have been driving. He had a revoked license. I got to find a way to get back at him. Right. I was like, I was, I was scheming up wild things. If I had AI back then, Richard, I would probably type it in like, how do I get back at this? And there's ChatGPT would give me an answer with a whole bunch of emojis or whatever, like how to get back at them. Right. And so that's how it was. And then through time and through like these micro steps that I talk about, my friend said to me the other day, it was like micro steps of massive action, just like little baby steps. Cause I measured my progress in like 1 degree of flexion and extension at a time, or like just lifting a little bit more weight. Like if I could do a weight workout for 5 minutes, like doing it for 5.5 or 6 was a big deal. So I had all these micro moments, but I also had like this big moment in a rehab session when I gave myself a little bit of a pep talk with just enough spice to it. And the spice was like, listen, Michael, you got to find another gear. Like you have to, you can do this better. I know you can do this better. So it was a little bit of self-talk of like my voice to me coaching myself. And in that moment, I was like, okay, let's find that extra gear. The very next day, I did my very first box breathing pattern, which is the meditation, which led to a whole meditation practice. Now I have over 23 or 24 years of a meditation and a gratitude practice. So I had those other practices. I also had a great sense of community. All that stuff was sort of like the glue that helped me like come back together. So it was that big moment in a rehab session, but then a whole bunch of like tiny little steps. I I believe that we generally change through tiny little steps that we can do consistently over time. Um, Keeping in mind that some people have big lightning bolt moments of change, but those are rare. Like the change that really sticks is stuff that we can weave into our lives. And that's what I was trying to do. maybe not intentionally, but that was sort of what I had energy for, and it was actually working out fairly well for me.
Can you talk a little bit more about the meditation? Because it's something I've tried myself, and I'll have these experiences where it just feels like, I just feel like I'm on top of the world for a day, and then I'll have 10 or 12 where it's just I'm itching just to get back to whatever I was doing. And then I hear people talk about how it's just this wonderful thing. And maybe you can describe, how it works for you and, how you got to this place where it's effective.
Yeah, so I love that what you just shared there, Richard. Like, because that's real life. Like some practices of meditation, we feel like, oh, we're like we're in the zone, right? We're like on our breath, and there's clarity, and it's awesome. And then there are times where we're like, what the heck is going on? And there's all these different thoughts in our head, and this body part's itching, and we're just antsy, and we don't want to sit, and it's frustrating, and that's the practice. I'm a big believer that you don't have to go away to some beautiful spa in Costa Rica unless you want to. Costa Rica, Pura Vida, right? Great place to go, right? But you don't have to have it in this like pristine conditions. You can practice mindfulness and meditation really wherever you happen to be. And it's for me, I think about it as a way to create space. Our lives are so jam packed with so much. Creating just enough space gives us a little bit more freedom. Freedom to be thoughtful and maybe be intentional with our next step or our next thought. Maybe it's a chance to bring a little bit more grace into things. So when we have practices where we feel antsy, where we can't sit, the great thing about mindfulness or meditation is that you can do a walking practice. So as a cyclist, also, as a walker, sometimes I have so much energy I can't sit still. So I go for a nice meditative walk. So it's just me and the soundscape and my body, of course. I'm not listening to a podcast unless you're listening to your podcast, which would be an excellent choice, but you just try to get into nature, which, we are nature. It's part of who we are. And a walking meditation can be really great for some people. And then some practices are just, we're antsy. We have a whole bunch of different thoughts bubbling up. We're thinking about what's for dinner or what that other person said or how did Becky get her hair so good? Like anything, like any crazy things. And we just notice like how crazy our minds are. And so when we pay attention to that, and then we get to know ourselves a bit better. The thing is, when we're rushing around and we're distracted by doing 100 million different things, all that stuff is playing in the background anyway. It's actually sort of probably taking away from some of our energy. So I'm a big fan of meditative practices that don't work out perfectly. They're a little rough around the edges because I think that's part of the practice. That's part of life. And so we celebrate those as much as we celebrate those practices where it's like, wow, it feels like bliss, and you just can't wait to have your post meditative smoothie, right? And then post it on Instagram, so we embrace it all. There's a poem by Rumi called "The Guest House," and um, in it he writes about like life is like a guest house with a whole bunch of different visitors coming, and we try to welcome them all. We stand at the door laughing and invite them all in, even the ones that are sort of unruly guests. And if we can live life that way, there's a little bit more fluidity or equanimity, if you will, when we can approach life that way.
You also mentioned gratitude practice, and I've heard this come up, but I actually don't know what gratitude practice is. I wonder if you can maybe share how
Yeah.
that works.
Yeah. So in the early days when it was really dark, all I focused in on, Richard, was all the things I couldn't do anymore and all the things I didn't have. Like, and everyone sort of painted this real scarcity worldview. Like, you're not going to ride your bike again, which means you're not going to run again, which means you can't hike again. There's a whole bunch of like can'ts. And so I didn't know anything about gratitude. Again, this was 2001. This is before the internet as we know it. It's before we learned how to do things through TEDx or, social media. We learned through books and magical things with paper and binding and all that stuff like that. Very old school. But I didn't know anything about gratitude. And someone told me about a little practice that they did. And so I started doing it. And the practice that I did back then is each night before I went to bed, I tried to think of three things that worked for the day or that I was grateful for. And it could be I had a good rehab session. It could be I had some visitors. It could be just my wife and my daughters. Sometimes it was just as simple as that they had the ultra processed guava juice in the hospital for breakfast. I was like, it's a good day when they have that. I'm a sucker for ultra processed guava juice. The real stuff too, I'm a big fan, but there was something about that guava juice in the rehab hospital I was at. I was like, okay, it's going to be a good day, right? So just little bright spots in the day that help balance out some of the challenge of the day. So it's not about turning everything into rainbows and unicorns. It's really a gratitude practice can help us see what we still have and can do. And now my practice is trying to feel grateful in any given moment. So it doesn't have to be just at bedtime. Some people do their gratitude practice in the morning when they first wake up. And so what I do now is I just try to find different things I'm grateful for as I go about my day. For example, I was driving home last night and this green car passed. It was just one of these really bright, small little green cars. And it had two antennae, the green antennae up. It sort of looked like a little like frog. And it was adorable. It was really cute. It was like, they decorated the car that way. And I was like, that was a nice warm, fuzzy moment. And gratitude gives us those little moments, those micro moments of cheer or some goodness that can make life that is really crazy nowadays a little bit more manageable, I believe.
Wow, it does sound super powerful. And I'm just thinking like I have three kids and they can kind of get down on things that are happening at school or with their friends. And it seems like it's something for kids, especially like for adults, I can see how it would benefit me. But I'm just thinking, I might just try that for the rest of our trip here in Europe. Just, instead of always focusing on what isn't working, let's start focusing on what's working. And I can only imagine the change in their demeanor.
I think you should definitely give it a whirl. We did it with our girls during their teenage years because we teenage girls, teenagers, teenage boys, just teenagers in general, right? There's a lot of like, ugh, Um, so we did this at dinner, and we're like, okay, what's one thing that was like really great that happened in school today, or we didn't even have to call it gratitude, just like, hey, what's one good thing? And there was a time where our youngest was such a stick in the mud. Like there was nothing good. Like life was miserable, right? And the best we could get from her was One Direction came out with a new song, and we're like, all right, we're gonna take that, we're gonna play with that. Like, what's the song? What's the song about? Who's the lead singer? And then inevitably, Richard, she would start quizzing us. She would play the song, and then it was up to us parents to figure out who was actually doing the vocals at the time. And most times, rather than not, I got the singer wrong. And so I did not have my One Direction knowledge up to snuff. And then she got all pissy again. But that was still, we had a brief moment of celebration. So I would definitely try it out. I think it's a great practice to do as a family. My oldest created a gratitude jar where she would just write down on a little strip of paper something she was grateful for each day and put it in a big jar. And then on New Year's Day, she would dump the jar out and read all the little notes of gratitude. So it just has a way of, it's a good counterbalance to some of the scarcity that exists in the world today.
I want to fast forward to your decision to ride across the US.
Yeah.
Can you maybe talk about, how did you come up with the idea to ride across the US and why did you want to do it?
So in 1976, the Trans-America Bike Trail, a bike route was created. It was, we were having the bicentennial, but they called it the bike centennial. And at that point in time, I was getting more into cycling. I still remember the first day I rode my bike without training wheels. I was like, freedom! Like I could go anywhere. So I always loved the bike, and I didn't really have a love affair with cars that a lot of people have when they get into their teenage years and their driver's license. But in 1976, I read about it in our local paper. I was like, wow, you can ride your bike across the country. So I sort of just stashed it away as like, that would be a cool thing to do one day. And fast forward, I had my accident. And then most people said, well, you're never going to be able to do that. I did get back on my bike and, started eventually racing my bike again with caution this time. But, trying to do rides, trying to get stronger and stronger. But I never really truly let go of this dream that maybe one day I can ride my bike across the country. And I happened to marry someone who had a dream of RVing across the country. So she always wanted me to take like 6 weeks off of work for my corporate job, and we're going to travel the country. But we never did that. And so I had a total knee replacement in 2021. And I was like, all right, we have the total knee replacement. That's out of the way. Let's do this trip. And I really wanted to do the trip, one, to sort of check off that dream I had, and also my wife's dream of doing an RV across the country. But in 2022, I really wanted to see America. And I also wanted to share America with, the people that I'm connected with, because I believe that it was a beautiful, awe-inspiring country of great nature and also really good people. So I thought one way of doing the trip was to showcase all the wonderful things I saw and all the wonderful people I met as a way to help us feel like, maybe there's a way we can come back together and feel greater connectivity. So I had that purpose behind it, but I just really wanted to experience the country, and I tried to do something big right around the day of my accident in a way to celebrate life. And I was like, that's a great way to celebrate life, to ride my bike across the country.
And what's the route that you took? Where did you start? Where did you end?
So I started in Astoria, Oregon. So the traditional Transamerica Trail and the route starts in Astoria and ends up in Yorktown, Virginia. So we mapped it all out. So you start in Oregon, you go into Idaho, into Montana, Wyoming, Colorado. But when we were in Wyoming, we met some other cyclists that were going east to west. And we met them at a diner. We were fueling up, they were fueling up. And they asked, hey, what should we expect for the rest of our trip? They were getting close to their end. They're in Wyoming. They were going to go to Astoria. And then we asked, well, what should we expect? And they gave us some tips. But when I was doing the planning for the trip, I had read stories and saw video on YouTube about the wild dogs in Kentucky. And I was like, these wild dogs, is it urban myth or what is it? These dogs are without leashes and stuff. And so I asked one of the guys, I was like, hey, tell me about the dogs in Kentucky. And he hesitated in a way that was like, there's a big answer coming. He's like, well, that's an interesting question. And then you get sucked in. He goes, I got chased like 6 or 7 times a day. And I'm like, you got to be kidding. And he told these horrible stories of him getting trapped by like a couple different dogs. And the way the route is, you're spending about 4 or 5 days in Kentucky. And I was like, that does not sound fun at all. So we went back to our RV camp and we totally rerouted the trip to avoid Kentucky. And we took something called the Eastern Expressway, which, like, what a great change we made, because we got to experience the wonderful Katy Trail through Missouri, a rails to trails, and then the Gap Trail that goes from Pittsburgh into Maryland, and then the C&O that goes from Maryland into Washington, D.C. And it just so happens my wife and I met in Washington, D.C. We had our first daughter there, so it was a fitting ending. And so I finished up at the Lincoln Memorial. So when we think about trying to bring the country together, I thought, well, that's a really good memorial to end the trip at. And so, so I avoided the dogs of Kentucky, and had some incredible rails to trails experience in this country. So a total win. So I'm really glad I ran into that guy at that diner.
What about the other roads you're riding on? Are they all kind of like secondary and tertiary roads with low traffic, or do you have to deal with some days where you got semis zooming by?
So there was really only a couple times. There was one time in Wyoming, I was on Route 80, but the shoulder was like 12 feet wide. I was on that stretch for about 13 miles. So actually, I felt pretty safe there. The secondary and tertiary roads where there was really no shoulder, that made me, there were definitely some moments where it was a little bit of like holding my breath because there would be some tractor trailers. In fact, there was one example of a double long tractor trailer that gave me no room at all, and I thought I was going to get sucked underneath them. Felt like it was going about 80 miles an hour, which is an exaggeration, but even going at 60, it was still a little frightening. But so most of the roads were country back roads off the beaten path. And the way the route goes, it avoids most major cities. So I never really went through a big city. We went into Eugene, Oregon. We kissed Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Obviously, I rode into Washington, D.C., but a lot of it was just rural America. And some were dirt roads. Some of it was rails to trails, so I was on gravel. It was great. And there were times like in Wyoming and Montana, I was the only soul around. It's such America is such a big country, and if we live on the coast, we don't really appreciate it. But it was just open space, maybe some ranches, some cattle, and just me, no cars. It was so wild. It was so cool.
Those are the best days, in my opinion. It just sounds beautiful. You had the benefit as well as that your wife was falling up in the RV. And so you could just, find a campsite each night, or would she drive ahead and find a campsite and you just come into, kind of like the perfect way to bike tour? Everything's taken care of. You don't just get off your bike and you're basically at home.
Yeah, I definitely had a lot of like thumbs up to the people who were doing self-supported rides, and they had their little pop-up tent and they were doing it in maybe a little bit of a different way than we were doing it. So the way generally we worked is that we had our route planned, like we knew what town we wanted to get to day in and day out. And we had a reservation at either an RV park or a national park or like a local park to camp, to put our RV there. And so I would wake up early and start getting on the road, and she would do her things. We had two of our dogs with us, so she would walk the dogs and get the RV set up. And then about 75 miles in, she would meet up with me just to check in, how you doing? And and then she would drive ahead to park the RV and sort of set up camp. I was doing about 95 miles a day. So on average. So there was only one time where she was really right behind me. There were some pretty big storms in the west, and we were playing a little bit of leapfrog. And I would ride a little bit, to check up into the sky to see how dark the clouds were and if there was lightning coming. And I would ride up to her and it'd be like, okay, let's ride a couple more miles and then leapfrog to there until the skies did open up and then I was able to get into the RV. So that made it pretty luxurious, if you will. So, but that's generally how we rolled. So she was rarely near me at any given moment in time. What was really cool is that we were doing a similar route, but we saw a lot of the same things, but we also saw different things. So here we are, we're in the same trip, if you will, the same roads, but given her speed, given my speed, given timing, we came back to camp each day and we just shared what we saw. And that was really cool. It just sort of underscores the value of perspective. And, that we all see things a little bit differently, even though we might be in the same exact situation as someone next to us.
I want to move on to your current endeavor, Pause, Breathe, Reflect, a company that you founded. Can you maybe share a bit about what the company does and how you help individuals?
Yeah. So when I was in recovery, the early days of my hospital experience, I was feeling overwhelmed. We talked about the dark days, and I knew enough from my sporting background as a kid that anytime the game got really like too fast or there was a pivotal moment, coach would always call a timeout. And in the timeout, he would say, "Hey, take a breath, like breathe." It was a chance to slow things down and plan better. He would draw up the next play and we'd go back on the court or the field and do the next play. So I was feeling overwhelmed and something within me told me like, okay, let's just take a moment to breathe. And so I did that very first box breathing pattern. And then that later turned into more of a full study of meditation and mindfulness. And I went on to become a qualified teacher. And then I started labeling these sessions as my PBR sessions, to be honest, Richard. I always thought I was making a little funny joke because most people in America hear PBR and they think of a particular beverage out of Wisconsin. And I thought I was being all funny. But really, I was like trying to just hit pause for a bit, for a couple minutes, 5 minutes, and take a few slow, deep breaths, and then create that space that I talked about. And in that space, I could reflect on like, okay, what does the next moment call for? Really be intentional about how I was showing up for my rehab, my visitors, just any given moment. So pause, breathe, reflect became a practice. And it's really designed to be short, micro practices of a minute or 2 minutes. A lot of people that I run into don't necessarily feel like they have a whole bunch of time to do a 10-minute or a 20-minute meditation. But when I talk to them about the value of it, I also, investigate. And most likely it comes out that they have probably 5 or 10 times throughout the day where they can take 2 minutes. So I'm like, okay, if you have 10 times a day, whether it's at a stoplight or restroom break or between a meeting, to take 2 minutes, you do 10 times two, you've done 20 minutes in the day. It's not all at once, but these little micro practices do add up. They do matter. And so I try to help companies and individuals practice this and practice gratitude. And the shorter practices make it easy for them to weave it into their lives so they can do it day in and day out. And that in that way, it becomes a way of living for them and not a transactional morning ritual thing to do. We already have enough to do in the morning. We've gotten a little crazy with our morning routines, I think, at least in some circles. So this way, it's just like, that's just what we do. Like when we feel maybe some stress in our body or feel a little overwhelmed in the moment, we can just, pause, breathe, reflect, set our intentions, and then move forward, hopefully with a little bit more grace. So I do a lot of training for companies. And then I also have a pretty cool app where all these practices are on there. And the really cool thing about our app, it also allows people to block distracting apps and websites. So we can actually spend less time on our phone and more time outside, right? And so many people come to me and say, I don't have time for this. I don't have time. And I'm like, I bet you have a whole bunch of time that's locked in your phone. And so if we can find a way to make the phone less addicting, we can find more time to take care of our health or get better sleep or be present with our family and friends or get outside for a good hike. And so what we try to do is block the distraction, but then also offer up people a really great way to weave mindfulness into their day.
That sounds so valuable. I know I check what I spend my time on my phone on every day. And most days it's like, I know a lot of days it gets up to an hour of just watching YouTube, and the kids are asleep, and I just watch stupid videos of dudes building log cabins and stuff like, guys. I'm not even into cars, but watching guys fix cars, and I don't know.
Yes. Yeah.
I watch guys clean carpets, and my wife says, "What the hell are you doing?" And I just say, "Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm just." This is the definition of wasting time, watching guys clean carpets. But yeah, it's just pure waste of time.
Yeah. I'm not against like guys washing carpets or doing their cars and stuff like that. It's just really about like after one or two videos of dudes doing that. Like, okay, we've done enough. Like we can put the phone down and move on to other things. So I'm not anti-smartphone. I have one. I'm not, of course, anti-app. I have an app, but it's really about trying to give people the power to reclaim some of their time and reclaim their power over the algorithm that can be so addicting. It seems to know just the right bit of candy to give us to keep us on whatever given platform we happen to be on. So if I can find a way through the app to give people back some time and they can take care of their health or get outside and or practice a little more mindfulness, I think we can I just create a different world, a world that's healthier, that really cares about Mother Earth, and we also remember our own nature. So that's the mission we're on.
And that kind of leads into my last question. You're an advocate for departure from the relentless pursuit of happiness and towards a more intentional way of living. Can you talk about what that means for you and how that applies to, just some average person who's, trying to, you know, live a regular life with all the stresses and challenges?
Yeah, today life is hard. It's uncertain. It's always been uncertain. We just because we have a little device that's cradled in our hands, we just there's a flood of uncertainty like coming into our phones and into our psyche, if you will. And so, there's so much out there, especially with social media. I think it's amplified this like what it means to be happy. And there's all this comparison that happens. And this whole like hedonic treadmill that so many of us are on that we'll be happy when it's sort of the arrival fallacy that we're never truly happy when we get there. And real happiness, I think, comes from like, are we happy with our lives and if we're happy in our lives? And, what can we do to, strengthen sort of our foundational building blocks of physical health, mental health, social well-being, and also our digital health. And so I really try to work with people to say, okay, like how do we work on that? But we do so with a little bit more grace. So when I was recovering from my accident, I had an acronym because I was an ex former corporate guy and we love to come up with acronyms. Like that's what we do. That's what we get paid to do. That's the big mystery of corporate life. It's just an acronym machine, right? It's a factory. So I had an acronym called GRACE and it stood for gratitude. The R was reframing, just, shifting our perspective a little bit. The A was about awareness and acceptance, action, and then adjustment. The C stood for community because we do go farther together. And the E was all around energy. So a little bit of our ripple effect. And so I think if we could take that type of framework into life, we can be happier in our lives and with our lives. And we don't have to chase the happiness anymore. We can just be in it. And then with that, we're open to even like the not so happy moments. And so when we have that range of accepting all of life's moments, I think it leads to greater happiness.
Wow. What a great approach. And I love the acronym. I was thinking of Office Space and the TDM reports. Uh,
Yes, yes, yes.
uh, but
Yes,
but Grace
yes.
is much better.
Yes, yeah, yeah. Oh, and I will throw in a red stapler for anyone who adopts Grace. So, and are a fan of the movie. Yes.
Michael, thanks for coming on the show to talk about your bike journey, but also all this insight in how your life was changed from your accident, and a really holistic way of living. I really appreciate you sharing your journey.
Well, thank you, Richard. Thanks for doing what you're doing. I love what you're doing with the podcast and all of your work. It's really cool to get people outside and into adventure, and yeah, it's a great way to live. So I really am grateful that we were able to sit down and connect.
Yeah, this was great. And what happenstance? We just happened to do it on the anniversary of your
Yeah,
last bad day. Like, it's like the worlds are colliding.
yeah, it's pretty cool that we're able to sit down on a very meaningful day. It's sort of for me, it's like a second birthday. So I had a good bike ride this morning, and we'll have a little second birthday cake later on tonight.
Perfect. If people want to learn more about you, where can they find the app? And is there a website they can follow along on?
Yeah, they can find my website, which is pretty easy. It's michaelobrienshift.com, all one word, michaelobrienshift.com. And then the app is available on Google Play and also Apple's App Store. So the whole feature to block distracting apps and websites, that's only an iPhone thing, because Google hasn't initiated it yet. But for all the team iPhone folks out there, they can try it out for free for 7 days, and when they do, we plant a tree on their behalf or remove ocean plastic with every member, and they can start reducing their screen time by 10 to 40%. So more time for more adventure, which is pretty cool.
That sounds great. I'll put links to both of those in the show notes. And thanks everyone for listening to this episode of the 10 Adventures podcast. We'll be back next week to explore the world and hear about more epic adventures. Bye bye.
Start planning your own adventure by visiting us at 10adventures.com and listen to other episodes of the 10 Adventures podcast on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you find your podcasts.